Hello, thanks everybody. Thanks for the intro. Stacy and I are here to talk to you today about 2010 workflow rebuilding. And with the shutdown of 2010, there's a pretty big gap that's out there in the market today. Y'all are probably feeling it with SharePoint Online, and then any upcoming migrations you may have in scope from your on-premise environment where 2010 was prevalent, and the migration of that to online now. There's a lot of remediation stuff that has to happen. Stacy, do you want to kind of help usher us into?
Yeah. Ooh, I'm getting some major.
That's probably me.
Oh. One of the things about 2010 workflows is not only are you forced to come off of 2010 workflows, but how to do it in an efficient way, and also keep your users' attention so they don't another change type of thing. So a lot of planning and stuff goes to it as well, on top of the actual development piece that needs to be done. So we're going to kind of go through that. I'm actually going to cut some of my pieces short, but of course it is in the slides, but I'm just going to kind of hit things high level so that you guys can really get the ins and outs of the development side of it, and how the process that we followed and stuff like that there. So with that, Richard, I'm going to swap the slide. I know that we had a great introduction, so we'll just quickly hit it. Our social media information is all on our slides, so you feel free to reach out and connect with us if you guys have any questions or issues afterwards. So our agenda, we're going to talk about best practices and governance, makers and champions, some strategies, lessons we learned, so hopefully we can help you not have to go through those, pitfalls, obstacles, and risks, functionality of the Power Platform. We're going to have, Tolan's going to go through a bunch of demos for you, and then we'll wrap it up for you. All right, so again, I'm Stacy Deer. I am a Microsoft Office and Apps MVP, owner of Focal Point Solutions, owner, plus I get my hands dirty as a senior architect. Mr. Toland?
Yeah, hopefully this is better with the echo. Switch my mics there. So Richard Toland, I work with Catapult Systems, and I'm a principal architect or principal consultant there. Primarily my focus is throughout the 365 service fabric and the substrate that crosses into Azure. So anything in that realm, that's where my architectural fingers are in the pie all the time. So.
And I have a tendency to call him Toland because I work with another Richard, so that's how I keep them separated. So, so best practices and governance. One, make sure that before you get started, always secure your tenant. A lot of times with workflows and forms and all stuff, you're working with data that you don't want other people to have. So make sure you're securing your tenant. The biggest best practice I can tell you is make sure you're setting up a service account for your Power Platform. Now, you can do it depending on the size of your development team. You can do one account called like Power Platform or something like that, or create one for each item inside of it, meaning Power Apps, Power BI, and Power Automate. Like I said, it's really going to depend on the size of your team and how you want to structure that. Establish a strategy team for the Power Platform. That strategy team should be identifying the governance that you're going to follow, the life cycle, what you're going to use, what you're not going to use. Kind of strategize. A lot of times, a lot of strategy comes on how you're going to develop to make sure you don't need the extra license, because that's when things get very expensive. So you definitely want to make sure that you're strategizing how you're utilizing the Power Platform. Set up data loss protection policies. Leverage out-of-the-box activity logs and analytics. Microsoft has put a lot of time and effort into that, and the information that you're getting back these days just straight out of the box is amazing. I would definitely go and use that. Build a center of excellence. It's either a center of excellence or a governance site, whatever your company would rather call it, to make sure that you're putting all your information in one place and sharing it. There is also a starter kit out there that helps you templatize a lot of the best practices already, so you don't really have to recreate the wheel. And also make sure you establish an automated audit process. Auditing is very important. If you can't tell, I'm a huge governance person. And of course, identify makers and champions within your organization. Of course, champions are people who dive in, provide feedback, are very vocal about what you're doing to make things better through the organization. Makers are those people that you allow them to create a flow or a Power App, and they get all excited with the shiny new object, and they want to go out and they want to build things to make things easier. Those people are going to be your makers. So what you're going to allow makers to do, setting the policies for them of what they can and can't do, and of course, then utilize those champions to get the information out there.
Yeah, great segue. The makers are your innovators. They're the ones with the ideas. Give them the tools, give them the power. So Power Apps, right? So best practices throughout Power comes into play where it's a data access question, it's a user access question, and then it's the repeatable process question. So once you're implementing your app, new software development lifecycle process or classic software development lifecycle process has changed through the Power Platform in order for your makers to now build in one environment and promote to the next environment. So access between those environments on your tenant is key. And you want to ensure that your users are able to, one, access the info, two, that they have licensure for the information, and that you're able to proceed between your implementations of one environment to the next environment, all within the same tenant. We talk about bottlenecks and data sources, which is a common thing, especially when you're talking to on-prem data services. So with a premium SKU in the E1, from E5 or Power App and Power User plans, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI per app or per user plans. Alternatively, an E5, G5 license structure will allow Premium SKU to talk to an on-prem data source too through the Azure Data Gateway or Power BI Data Gateway, whichever flavor you've chosen. Those can oftentimes cause bottlenecks for large data services, and what we typically recommend is use the classic application development methodologies, right? So it's lean heavy on model your view and then view your model so that you're pre-filtering down the list or data queries that you're asking data for and not overwhelming the systems that are accessing it. That can also happen for online services too. So Azure's Cloud SQL databases or SharePoint lists, you can run across bottlenecks for data contingency and data throughput through to your app, which will end up causing performance issues, or your users would maybe perceive a performance problem at the user end. When we talk about usage patterns, there's a lot of ways to access Power Apps. You can access it through the apps in the App Store. So there's a Power App in the Google Play Store or the Android iOS Apple Store. And within those, once you've authenticated, certain Power Apps inside of your tenant can be published to your users. That's one way to leverage a Power App. Now with the exposure through Teams apps integrations is huge. So Power Platform promotion through the Teams application is also viable through the SharePoint application in the App Store, or plain old browser. When you're accessing a Power App through your browser, you want to be aware and that Power Apps, while built to be browser agnostic or platform agnostic, there are still some dependencies or some nuances in browser types. So the different rendering engines handle functions or features different ways. We also talk about geographical location. That's really pertinent for multi-geo tenants, where you may have some users in one country trying to access data in another country, and you want to be sensitive there from a best practice perspective about how you're fetching data, what cloud service or what on-prem service you're talking to, and what's the fastest route path to get there through the data gateway, and or through your route path to that cloud entry point. Throttling is a huge issue, right? So when you hit a big data set, let's say I have a company of 5,000 users and I tell everybody, hey, go pull up the open enrollment list and let's make sure that you get all your stuff done. Well, if it was a SharePoint list and I'm pulling back 1,000 items for 5,000 users, that could crush your throttling. So you want to be aware of what impacts you'll have on the service substrate in Office 365 as well. One Power App can go crazy and really take a big chunk out of that throttling for you. So be cognizant of that and be aware of what data you're pulling and how much of it, how big and how fast, how wide you're spreading out your app usage.
Right, so with your makers and champions,
sorry about that.
People you want to look for, people with leadership qualities that are willing to share information and lead people. It's almost kind of like that leading people to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, you can lead them there, right? Lead them there and then see what they do. You also want people that carry an influence. You want to, the leaders that, you don't want to be a follower all the time, right? You want to be a leader, something you're excited about. They get people engaged. People who, I know this really sounds bad because some people there's too much water cooler talk, but in this instance, you want those people that, contain that water cooler talk. They're the ones that start it. A lot of times people learn from those discussions. So you want to key in on those types of people. People are also diligent in their work efforts. Doesn't mean they have to be OCD, but people who like to follow a process. They step 1, step 2, step 3. They don't like to find those shortcuts around things or try to figure out ways to break things. You want people who are very specific about their job and making sure it's done accurately and in a timely fashion. Understand your organization's vision for governance. Some companies, they don't put enough emphasis on governance. So in a situation like that, you have to make them aware of why you need it in certain situations to get them to jump on the bandwagon, essentially. But organizations that have a very structured governance, you also have to find out how to take this information from the Power Platform and how it fits in there. It may not fit with how it's currently structured because it's new technology and there's things you can and can't do based off of the old designer and the way you used to develop. So you have to work through those types of things together to update your policies or energize the fact that you need governance and you have to have those policies to be successful with this. The last thing you want is people doing all different things and then trying to clean it up at a later point in time, like not using a service account right out of the gate. If you don't, whoever is assigned their name, because they created it, it's under their name, they leave the company. Can you provide another owner and get it and still continue to use it? Absolutely. Is it easy? No. It's not an easy process, not something you want to have to go through, and especially if that person has built hundreds of these things within your organization and that they're used every single day. And, find people who have an interest in building things. Power Platform is somewhere where you're building something and at the end that you're very proud of it. People who love to be crafty and build things are going to be perfect people for a Power Platform.
Yeah. So here we're going to talk about some strategies and those Power Platform people. We used to call them power users, right? I call them the power passionate now because they are, they're users who really want to get going and they need the tools, they need the methods. So let's talk about some strategies that we can employ for those folks to find their best success rate. So we initially, when you're looking at SharePoint Online, right, in 2010 workflow, it's kind of our topic here. We're talking about the retirement of 2010 workflow, which is officially shut off on SharePoint Online. And if you haven't already asked for it, you've probably felt that pain, right? 2010 workflows just stopped working. So what you want to tackle is for most tenants, you can still leverage the SPMS the SharePoint modernization scanner. And what it'll provide you is it'll read through your tenant access to find any instances where those workflow associations existed. And then you can tackle those. Aside from just the workflow associations, there's a lot of really good information in there from application landscape as well, unsupported list templates, unsupported page views. Typically, when we're talking about 2010 workflows that found their way into SharePoint Online, they were not usually created, I would say within the last 3 to 5 years, the majority of those workflows that found their way to online came from a migration. Migrations pump in classic UI in most cases, and that's becoming less and less prevalent for sure. But of those tenants with lots of classic UI, the SPMS tool, the SharePoint Modernization Scanner, is a fantastic tool to use for discovery of those application landscape components, of your list views, of your workflows, 2013, 2010 workflow, and then present the opportunities for the Power Platform to come in and help out. Where we're looking at Power Platform really in that SPMS landscape, it's targeted towards primarily Power Apps for application interface. That would be, we migrated this thing in with JS Link and it doesn't work anymore, or we migrated a classic list view, or we migrated some workflow, 2010 workflow. So Power Apps and Power Automate are the two components that SPMS really focuses on for application replacement. When we want to talk through demos, right? So 365 features and functionality are vast. There's a lot in that service substrate, and it's a challenge to keep up with all this technology because it's constantly changing. What really helps is standing up a demo environment and making sure that your user community, those power users, the power passionate folks, and anybody interested in application customization can see, they can look and feel, they can tangibly dive into a 365 demo experience and really feel what those controls, the user controls and the features and functionality can provide for them. So don't be shy, spin up a dev tenant, they're free. You have up to 25 dev users that you can get an E5 license and discover the entire suite. The whole platform's available to you. So spin up a dev tenant and get crazy with your power passionate people. Those power users are your deepest link to what your feature functionality landscape is going to look like. How many features you want to use, where you're going to use those features, what you want to do. We talk about using sessions, and a breakdown session for kind of a yesterday and a tomorrow in that demo environment is great to show and tell either future functionality that you'd like to implement, and then maybe some of the where. It's also a very good communication tool for your developers or those power users to say, this is where I'm coming up against challenges. You all in IT have implemented some control spaces for me that I'm trying to navigate those waters, and I'm expressing challenges here. All right, I'm experiencing challenges. So it's a great place to show and tell bidirectionally in that conversation. Let's talk about new features. Let's talk about things where you've locked me out or I need your help. SMEs are an excellent resource too. So you have subject matter experts for the processes, the business process management, the doers in your organization, right? The folks that are living through those business processes. And those subject matter experts are key in making decisions on how your workflow could find process optimization as you're stepping out of what used to be there in 2010 actions and moving now towards the Power Automate flows. There's a whole new landscape of options available to you, and talking to those SMEs, really getting a deep understanding of what their process looks like will maybe find process improvement along the way with the new tool sets. So definitely work with those SMEs, work with your business users. Your business users are key, right? So at the keyboard where they're inputting data or they're reading data out and understanding what their role is throughout that process is also another key factor where you'll find process improvement through a deeper understanding of what was yesterday's process and how do I lean on the Power Platform for tomorrow. These sessions are great in that, it don't take a lot of time. You could sit down for an hour a week, a half an hour a week, and just rock through, knock down processes and document the process flow as they stand today or as they stood yesterday, and how you want to improve those processes with the new tools. Baby steps. Asking lots of questions and providing lots of time for testing. So ask lots of questions, yes, as you're building through or walking through these processes, but definitely provide them lots of time for new tooling and new process testing. So I want to build a new workflow, a new Power Automate flow to replace a 2010 thing from yesterday. It's new. It looks 100% new, right? It behaves differently. And some of that may be invisible in the background. It was just sending an email. I still get my email. Great. Maybe it's I need to input some more data, or maybe I need to have a totally different approval process where I can click and approve right in my email. If you're changing their look or feel or their functionality, allow them lots of time. Change management is key. It's a really big issue. So train your users and give them lots of time for testing of new features or new functionality as you're changing their processes.
All right, so some lessons learned. Use one of the biggest things is anytime that you have to rebuild something, use this time to make improvements to that. If you have to rebuild something just because, the version no longer exists and you just rebuild the same exact thing, you're missing a great opportunity to make it up to the users that they have to go through a change. right? Users hate change, but the thing that they hate, dislike even more than that is for someone to rebuild something and then give them the same problems that they already had. So this is your opportunity to make improvements to this as well. I'm sure there's support tickets, or you've heard people complain about various things in the process. Take this time to fix those. Make it better, streamline it, make sure there's additional automation that they say, hey, it cuts off here and it could go a little further. Also, there could have been organizational changes from the time this was built till, this time that you're getting ready to rebuild it. Look at those factors, get some feedback on it. Yes, will it mean that, you're having to make changes and it could be bigger? Chances are, when you go through for improvements in a process, typically your process becomes smaller because you found ways to streamline it a little better or automate certain pieces to make them easier. So some, yes, they may be a bigger process, but overall, typically it's more streamlining the same one you have, and it becomes easier to manage the overhead of it once you've rebuilt it. So keep those things in mind. The other thing that it really does is it helps keep the users engaged when they're getting something new. I know most of them say they hate change, but if it's something that's going to help them day to day to make their jobs easier, then do it, because that's what keeps them excited, keeps your user engagement. You don't want user adoption to tank just because you change, you change a process. Especially if you change a process and leave it identically the same, just, look and feel is different. So give them something to get excited about. Hit those things that they've been complaining about most in that process. The other thing, and I kind of put this in capital letters, is do not rush. We know there was a deadline for the whole 2010 workflow thing, but you could get extensions. People could get extensions so that you could take time, because, some people have a lot of 2010 workflows out there. I can't remember the one list that Tolan and I looked at one day. I was like, wow, they spent a lot of time on it, because in 2010, there's only so much you could do to make things efficient and small, right? So they're rather large. You have time. You can extend it and stuff like that, but just don't rush. If you rush, you're just recreating new issues and not correcting the things that you need to be. And then you're going to, not only have the users frustrated, you're going to be frustrated yourself, and then management. And you can avoid that by slowing down, plan it accordingly, talk to the right people, document it. If you're documenting your design, guess what? You're creating your governance that goes along with it. So document it, get sign off on it, make sure everybody's, 100% on board. The other things, if you do all that and everybody is on board, it leaves a lot less things that come up in your UAT that have to be changed. So make sure you're inviting the right people to the meetings, explaining it, document, show them, have them say, yes, that's great, sign off on that bad boy. And then when you go through UAT, you may have some minor tweaks or whatnot that need to be done. But the thing you want to try to avoid is, halfway through the process, they want to do a rewrite, right? Because they didn't have the right people in there. We've all been there and done that. But you just want to make sure in a situation like this, where even though you have more time because of the extension, you still have a time frame, right? So if you plan it accordingly, you can help eliminate some of those things.
Yeah. All good points, all good points. Last couple.
I have some more, yeah. So document, and we're going to show you some examples of some of them that we did, but in that, when you're designing, don't always just document what your new process is, especially if no one really knows what the old one was. A lot of times we find that out and they're like, I don't really know, I just hand it to this person or whatever, right? Literally document what the current process is, and then your new, so that you have a comparison. You have your improvement plan visually in front of you. They can see it. They can see where the process took 50 steps here, but in the revision, you see like 15, right? Let them see that impact of what you're doing by the planning and the meetings that you're having. I'm a huge proponent. I never walk into a client and they're like, well, I don't know how to see my data in here, what they use. Dev tenants are great. You can spin them up for any type of industry. That's all great. But clients like to see, how does my data fit into that? I see how that company's data fits, but what about mine? Never hesitate to provide mock-ups potential look and feels of the information that they've provided. Do a quick little demo of, have them give you like an example small form or fields or something like that, and build a little small demo so they can see it. If they can't see or envision their content or their process in there, it's going to be harder for them to accept it, agree to it, and think that it's actually going to work for them. So let them see it, right? So show them demos, especially if you're working internal to your company. You probably got all kinds of quick little demos you create or mock-ups. For consultants, you work with some industries over and over and over again, but one thing that we've all learned is no two companies are ever alike. No two companies have the same exact processes, call the things the same exact names. So doing a demo, mocking it up, however is most visual for them, make sure you do that. It actually goes a long way.
It certainly does. So talking about process documentation, right? So what we did was for this demo, we went ahead and Stacy and I worked together, and we went through that kind of process, that life cycle of take a 2010 workflow of what it used to be today, right? So on the left-hand side here, I've got something that says existing class registration process flow. In our use case example, what we did was we worked through this use case where participants of a class, online learning or in-person training, what the supposed client here wants to do is build like a class catalog, a course catalog, and then provide an interface for students to come and register, participants to come and register for the class, so that their instructors are maintaining the registration process, the class information process and what's in the curriculum for each of the courses in one place, and then the class registration is maintained in another place where the participants can go and see which classes they've registered for. They can track those, show some LMS history for their organization. And so the current process, as it was documented, you can see it's a very linear flow. We've got some dotted lines here where maybe somebody was injecting, either a conversation or an email that was sent out. And then on our new process, to speak to Stacey's point, we really took the time to dig deeper in this process eval and understand maybe there's some areas where we can do some process improvement, maybe put an approval loop in place where we are sending in or gathering information at a different stage. So what happens is our class is defined, and then down here during the registration process, there's some additional information on hotel registration. Do you need a hotel? There's some additional information that's captured on the number of seats that are available in the class, and those two forms connect together. So whenever a participant registers for a class, it deducts that number of registrations from the master list of how many seats were available for that instructor at that location. So definitely finding process improvement rather than bouncing a bunch of emails back and forth on the source process. We now built a lot of that stuff into the Power Automate stream and in Power Apps interface. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the pieces for the forms here. So our source form in this use case started with an HTML form and then evolved eventually into SharePoint list form or info path, right? So that's our classic use case, and everybody goes through that. As we're stepping into Power Apps, we breeze right on into the easy button where I make a SharePoint list and I click customize this form, and I choose my vertical Power App, right? That's neat. It sits in a blade on the SharePoint list. That's fine. It sits right on your SharePoint overlay blade. What tends to be a problem there is I can't access it on my mobile. I can't present that I can't publish that to my user community. I can't migrate that between environments, and my software development lifecycle there is null and void because it's forever bound to that list at that location. I can't, if I make iterative changes, they are forever linear and serial changes. They cannot promote in between environments, and I can't have co-development happening for true lifecycle. So, enter the custom apps where you're leaning into Power Apps for Canvas apps or model-driven apps and leveraging the environments inside your tenant so your makers can actually start in one place, make tweaks, make changes, co-develop, and then promote through a formal promotion process and step up into published apps that you're able to share out through your enterprise. You can publish them out so that users can leverage them in the Power Apps app or a formal browser interface or through Teams apps. Now you can promote those off to Teams apps and really use the power of the Teams Dataverse or Dataverse for Teams and or your actual Teams landscape. So it's threaded directly in the Teams app interface. So what we've done is through this use case for our demo example, we did exactly that, right? So we built ourselves a Canvas app here that would take on the brunt of that form interface and replace the raw HTML and or info path from the source. Behind this Power App, we went through and threaded the workflow right behind it. So the workflow piece is Power Automate form. Again, we started with SharePoint Designer workflow, right? That's everybody's classic 2010 or 2013 SharePoint Designer workflow. We took a look at the actions, and again, this is a conversation that you need to have with your organization. Yesterday, we had actions, and they were of a certain flavor. In tomorrow world, we have totally new actions of a totally different flavor. And some of them are way more powerful in the things that we can do. It's no longer just send an email. Maybe it's send a notification to my cell phone. Maybe it's, or to my user's cell phone. Maybe it's, prompt for an approval or an authorization, or a reach out to another cloud system and toggle another bit. So there's a whole lot more power than you've ever had before. And those can really help you find process optimization, really streamlining that, right? So when we take a look at that vertical, the top-down, the vertical workflow, business process flow, as we documented the original, and then we look at what we can do with process automation, or we can look at approvals, or we can look at, looping logic or branching logic throughout Power Automate flow. You really find that process optimization in the Power Automate process. So rather than having a whole bunch of scattered actions and steps in your SharePoint Designer, you now have that linear Power Automate structure that you can drill through, where if we use SharePoint as our data source here, obviously, and talking to within the license structure, SharePoint's all included in your SKU. So we use that as our data source. When an item was created or modified, we go and we gather up some variables. Maybe that was making logical choices, or maybe it was gathering data from totally other places. In our example, we read it right in, gather those variables, and then we make some decisions, conditional decisions, and we make some logical choices based on those. And that was all per the documented, optimized process that we documented and fanned out to move more horizontally for parallel threads rather than a single serial vertical on the process.
All right, some risk and obstacles that we ran into. It was overlooking and eliminating conversations with business users. In a process, there are certain processes that you can have a lot of feedback. And you may miss that one little thing that someone said that has a huge impact, and you're not aware of it. So some of the things that we've done is to make sure that we're getting all the information is we also supplied things like a form or survey type thing of key things that they want to make sure are resolved or corrected, or resolved or added to the new features of the process. So we let them write it in a form. So one, if it's important to them, why it's important, what the priority is, have them give us some feedback more than just in a discussion manner, because sometimes when you go into a meeting and someone asks a question, it may not instantly click. So we kind of follow up to make sure that we're getting that information from the business users. And also making sure if you have a question on something, like you don't exactly understand what they're asking or what they're stating, please make sure you follow up. We've had an instance where someone said something, it's just because they didn't understand the terminology. It didn't seem relevant or like it even connected into the actual meeting that we were having on the process. And it wasn't followed up on, and here it had a rather large impact to the process. So, find ways where you can make sure that you're getting all the information. And if you don't understand, ask questions. Resistance from the users. The more you don't listen to the things that they say or the feedback they provide, the more resistance you're going to get. So one of the things is we always make sure we let them know that we're reading their information, we're taking in their feedback in one way or another. It doesn't matter if you actually use what they suggested. It's all about acknowledging the fact that they did supply the information and that you really took it into consideration. The more you do that, not only will it help the process that you're working on, but it will help all future things as well. Risks, everybody gets a little excited as they start working on something new, but just remember, just because you think you know, you may not. So rushing the process, you're like, oh, I can knock out this next phase because it just works this way. Remember, hold up, don't rush that. Make sure you're having the proper conversations and it's documented and signed off before you hit that next level of the development. Otherwise, you've got a lot of rework you're going to have to do, and that's back on you, right? But it's back on you, but it causes issues with the project and with keeping that relationship with your users. Lack of requirements gathering. I'm a huge requirements type person, but there are times where you get busy or you've just done it so much and you try to shortcut it, right? When you're working on a process of, to improve something, to replace it, especially replacing a current process, that's just an area you can't cut back on. The more you cut back, the more rework you have to do, the more angry your users and management gets. So make sure you have your requirements, make sure they're documented somewhere. And because if you don't, when something new is asked as well, you don't have something to go back and say, well, this is scope creep to this process. Maybe let's put that on the backlog for another phase, right? Because especially depending on the time frame that it would take to meet that requirement in /rework because of it, be able to identify what you need to do now to cause the least amount of rework for anything future, but also don't always, once you have your requirements, don't let things continually being added. That's what backlog is for. That's what the next phase, version 2.0, right? So you have to make sure you have a nice balance there. Collaboration, you have to, I think I've been stressing this from my very first, my slide till now, is working with each other, talking, communicating. When you're working through a process like this, I'm sure Richard can, he will second this, set up a Teams for it. Have that communication, have that discussion, share the information in there. Because the great thing is when you're using Teams to have that collaboration, and if any meetings you have, you're recording them, they can find them in there. You can upload your documentation, the task lists that are associated, but you're having discussions in there and it's all held in one place. So if you need to go back and find something what did that one person say, or exactly how did they say it, what those options, it's in one place. It's going to be easy for you to find. So use something like that to keep the collaboration going. Collaboration doesn't mean you have to have a meeting or a phone call. It could just literally be a chat and posting stuff in there, right? And I think the most important one is make sure there are feasible and attainable timelines. Many times we have projects and a client goes, I want to go live on this date. And we're like, okay, as long as we're getting all our information and, the feedback that we need, that date should be fine. But then as things go through the project, you start realizing the other things that you needed by certain dates are not coming in on those dates, which means that your, go live is no longer feasible. Richard's laughing at me because we're dealing with this right now, but we just had that conversation. You have to make sure you're staying on top of that. Always communicate either to your client or to the department. Say, hey, I'm not going to be able to meet the deadline unless I have this by this date. Make sure you're documenting it too. Documentation is your friend, right? And put it back on them. If you give me this information by this date, I can still meet your go live. If you can't, then the go live is going to have to be pushed back. There has to be give and take. Client can't wait or a user can't wait until the day before, hand you over everything and still expect you to go live the next day. Right? So you have to be able to manage that accordingly. But as long as you're communicating throughout the process, it shouldn't be a big issue. The problem comes when you're not communicating and not reminding them. And then at the last minute say we can't go live. That's when the problem's going to be. So communication is key.
Yeah. I think I would say, echo the Power Apps is Power process, right? So if I'm doing data intake, I'm doing data automation, I'm doing data analysis, largely, especially internally, when you're without a formal process or a project where you're doing formal stuff, it's invisible, right? It's intangible. You didn't have to open or document or do anything for your power user community, and it gets run away and runs to a level of complexity, I think, that is often invisible to that process. So make sure that you're documenting along the way, and yeah, working with your business for those tangible timelines. They're really important, and for your safety as a developer in the Power Platform, as well as for the business's safety or the customer safety, right? And ensuring that they do meet their deadlines on time. So we're going to switch over and do a little bit of demo here for that application. I wanted to show you the app that we did build and some of the workflow pieces. So again, we're taking in some data into a SharePoint list, and in the background, we do some automation here for that class registration process. When a class is created and a class is registered for, we've done some automation behind the scenes with Power Automate Flow. In the class information list, where we gather the curriculum or the class details about location, instructor, etc. We take in one field where in the process flow, you saw a loop that kind of looped around for us to say, hey, when an instructor makes an edit to the class, right? They start with the source curriculum. This is what we want to teach, and then they come back and say, oh, I had a spelling error. I need to send out a new course information, or maybe I ran out of time, my curriculum ran too long, I need to shave 15 minutes off of it, and they make an update to that. Well, in the class information, the process loop where on that very serial one, you saw the wings that were coming out from a dotted line. Those were a lot of email chatter back and forth in business to say, oh my gosh, hey everybody, I just updated the curriculum. Hey, thanks students, I want you to know, don't forget, I need to shave off 15 minutes from the course, and we're gonna lose this bullet point. To loop that into the process, what we've done is we've used Power Automate then to take on the brunt of that chatter back and forth. So it does some logical look inside of the application for a checkbox that says, do you want to update the users, the attendees on class information update? And if these variables if the variable was flagged here to gather yes or no on a Boolean, did they check the box in that form to say, yes, please update my users? It goes through a switch logic to read from the variable and say yes or no, right? Do a case for yes and otherwise no. That's a Boolean check. And if I did say yes, it gathers up from the item. It gathers up any comments that they've injected into the form. So they've added some comments. They want those comments to go out to the user community or to their registered users. So then it checks for the conditions to say, did they say yes? What are their comments? Did they add the comments? And if so, then I'm going to go ahead and send that off to each of the registered users. So we take an email in here and say, hey, guess what? We gathered up some information from the instructor who added an update to the class information. They want you to be aware of it. If they didn't add any comments to their updates, they said, yes, I want to let everybody know, but I didn't add any further information. It just sends them a logical email saying, hey, guess what? Your trainer, I'm sorry, I was talking to the left and right boxes backwards. Over here on the right-hand side, I've got, yes, they've added some comments, and here's the updates that they've added for you from the form. Over on the left-hand side, it's no, they didn't add any comments, but they wanted you to know. They did check the box to let you know. So my participant email for each of the participants that are registered for the course, it goes through and looks them up based on their registration, if they're still registered for the course or not, and then emails those users. So that was one of the loops that you saw in that process automation where we talked through with the business and said, hey, you used to do this with 25,000 emails all the time. Are you sure you really want to do that in an email anymore? Or can we kind of help loop that in for you to make the lookup for who are the registered users and send out the emails and let them know the comments? Do you want to automate that? And so we did. We pulled that into the loop. Definitely looking for process automation there. To show that, so this is our class information form. And if I take this on down here into the new form, so what we've done here is created a Power App with multiple pages. This will come in and on the initial setup of the classroom information. It gathers up, things like class title, gathers up the information for the trainer name, and then the class description, and they can attach any items that they want to for courseware. And then over here on the next page, as I move into my edit screen, so suppose that an instructor wants to come back, and in the next page they want to make a change. So this is where they would enter in their notification text in this notification field, pop on some notification text, and then text and say, yes, I'd like to notify my users of the changes. This yes will trigger off that workflow process to then send out the email notification to everybody that's registered. Well, that begs the question, right, of, well, where's the registration actually happening? If in this list we're looking at the courseware catalog, we also set up a button that says in here, the display screen, we have a button in here that says register for the class. This register for class button, when users go to the list or the course catalog list where they can actually see these Power Apps rendered with the course information, the display screen is going to show them, hey, there's a maximum number of seats, there's some remaining seats, here's the link to all the curriculum information, here's the details about this course. And then we present for them a button that says register for this class. This registration kicks the user with a deep linking out to the class registration application and includes with it the class title, so that class registration form will pick up on what class are they wanting to register for and default all those fields for them as they step in. So deep linking is really handy here, where I can take source information of instructor, or we took source information for what class item or what class information we wanted to carry forward into the registration. And so the users come through, they click this. This form is the class registration. Now, our class registration process tracks to a different SharePoint list also to keep within the SKU. So it's reading and writing from SharePoint lists for all the data structure. And on start, this one reads in certain parameters as it's going through and setting up a bunch of variables for us to use as global variables on the app on start action. So we read in from the query string parameters. I'm going to read in what's the ID of the current item. If I'm new, I come through as a 0. If I'm editing an existing registration, I would come through and gather that up from the URL. And then I gather my class info into another variable that I key off of when I'm setting, oops, sorry, shrink this up, when I actually set the class name. So this is a lookup back to that other SharePoint list with the class information in it for the courseware catalog. And it sets the ID of that from the URL query string. It sets that class up for me. So I've already got that defaulted when I click the enter the registration button. They can change it if they'd like to, but it's a nice thing for them in that process automation where we're optimization, where we're talking about, gosh, what are the niceties that you could do with this new tool, rather than, hey, HTML form for registering for a class needs to go and type it in every time. Or InfoPath even, go and figure it out and filter it. They wanted the option to default it for which class they came into. So it's a nice conversation to have for process automation. We set that default value based on the query string value that was passed in. Another option that we do here that was nice for them was, hey, I'd love this form to default to the user that's actually filling it out, but then provide them the ability they could change it. So if on my app on start, what we do here, I'm going to go back to that. On the app on start, we read in the current user. We do that through the Graph API hookups here when we're talking to the connector for SharePoint list expansion, and we gather up the current user. And then we also, I'm sorry, not SharePoint list expander, it's the person Office 365. There we go. So we're gathering this up from user attribution. And then likewise with the user's email, we can determine, so this is a people picker, and people picker works similar to lookup-ish, right? It's a special field that requires the data construct for the record in that field to be set for people pickers. It's what's your claim, what's your name, what's your how does it display, etc. So when I'm looking at that, this form gathers by default, calls up to Graph and says, hey, who am I, right? Go look at my information in Graph. Go get that through the connector, Azure connectors, and then I pull back that information and set that as a record into my participant field for the default user. Now, again, they can change it if they'd like to. That was the business requirement. If maybe it should default to them registering themselves, but maybe they want to register for somebody else, so they can change that field if they needed to. And then a supervisor is another field that's similar, where for the supervisor, once the participant is set and the value is determined for the people picker of who's participating, who's the students, this business requirement said, hey, can you also go and fetch my supervisor? We changed that up a little bit, right? So this is actually using the Office 365 connector through Graph. And then on the Office 365 connector, if you read this a little bit backwards, right? So I say, what's my current user's email? We set that with a variable when we looked them up as the current person or the person in the participant field. We set that value to be what into another field. And then we read from that one to gather the text of that. So this manager says, hey, listen, I want you to look up the manager of the user that was selected as the participant, look up the manager, and then gather their attributions so I can gather their mail directly. So this Office 365 user's manager of user is really the object that I'm looking for, and the attribute about that object is their mail and or their display name and or their mail again. So we build another record here for people picker, and we inject that directly into this supervisor field. Come on, shrink up for me, click the buttons. So then that goes in here into the supervisor people picker also. So real handy, it's just some nuanced tricks. But again, having the conversation with them for process optimization was key, because we didn't have to, again, go back and forth with email. We didn't have to have a telephone conversation anymore. A lot of this is built directly into the application. Now, you did hear me say earlier, okay, so we create a class information that's set up in a course catalog list where my course information lives. The users can go off and create a registration. When they create this, when they click the submit button here, it registers them for the class, and you can see they have the option, it defaults to enroll because they came into the form from enrollment. But once it's created, they could come back and edit later to say, hey, I need to withdraw from this class. All right, so this record's going to write into another SharePoint list where we're tracking all the course registrations for all of our students. We track which are enrolled and which are withdrawn. When they enroll, I need that to reach back to my course information and update how many seats are remaining on this class. How many seats are still available? So we do that with Flow as well, Power Automate flows as well. So when a class registration is created, we do a couple of different checks here. So on a creation, the assumption is that I'm creating a brand new one. I usually would not create, and during process discussions with the organization, we said, no, it wouldn't ever come in and say, I'm going to create a brand new one and start with a withdrawal. That wouldn't make any sense. They want to come and create a brand new registration. It's going to come in to enroll. So it's an assumed, right, that through our documented process with the business, the assumption is there, it's valid in that the class course registration creation would by default assume it's new and I'm going to enroll a student. So with that assumption, we go in and we take a look at the property for the enrollment. We look up the course, the class information. We pull up the class information for that specific class that they're registering for, and then we do a little bit of math here to increment or decrement. So on course registration, we are incrementing the number of registered users, and then when I'm pulling this into my remaining seats, this is a calculated column on the SharePoint list to let SharePoint do some of the hard math for us, right? Let it do all the hard work. SharePoint calculated columns are fantastic for take the details, take the hard work, do the hard stuff for me, and then I can render that stuff in the records when I'm showing my Power App in the display mode. So as we edit this one here, I'm incrementing a column. I simply pull up the current number of registered users and then I increment that by 1, and then I save that right back to that record. So I update my class information with the number of currently registered users. The calculated column does the hard math for me to say, hey, how many seats are left? Which isn't really all that hard, but it's calculated column, let it do the work. So then the seats remaining gets decremented by 1. So the calculation takes the number of seats total minus the number of seats registered and shows me the remaining. Conversely,
Hey,
yeah,
Richard,
go ahead.
real quick. just because the other one ran a little long. I
Yeah.
have to drop for a meeting. I know that I think
That's all
I
right.
have more slide. You probably got that. But thank you guys for inviting me. And Richard, great job as always. I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks.
See you.
See ya.
So conversely, we have this similar process where we actually decrement that variable. So when they come in and they are edited a workflow now, so our action on this one is edit, not create. So when an item is created or modified, when an item or file is modified, I come in, I assume that this is being modified now, and I can make some logical decisions on the modification. This is expansive on our dev environment here. We kept it pretty simple, but now you're in the modification mode and you can pick out any of the data that's in that field or in any of the fields on that record and get crazy on making logical decisions. We're simply leaving this down to, I need to decrement the value for the registered users. So go look it up again. What's my class ID? Go grab the class ID. Then I'm going to edit. I want to reach in and touch the field that says the number of decremented seat count for registered users. And I'm going to decrement that value by 1 again, and then write that back into the column for that class. So I do an update back to that one. All right, so that's the forms and flows behind this one and then our class registration. Are there any questions? I don't see anything in the chats here, but I think we're, if you do have questions, feel free to toss them through or reach out to Stacy and I. I'm gonna pop back, I think, in the interest of time, and let's switch back over to our slides.